Hi guys, I'm Adam, and today I will be continuing my discussion about intuition behind tariff and quota, part 2. So if you haven't watched part 1, please check out the part 1. Part 1 is about free trade, tariff, and welfare analysis associated with it. So let's dive straight into part 2, which is about quota and its comparison with free trade and welfare analysis. So the difference between quota and the free trade is that quota is actually a import limit set by the government, while the free trade is basically like it allows a huge influx of foreign goods and services into the country. So that is a primary difference between those two. So what the quota does is that, say, if we set the quota imports quota to be 4.5, then what it will do is that it will actually shift the domestic supply curve to the right side by 4.5. So let's draw the new supply curve. The new supply curve will be over here because that is precisely the point of a 4.5 million barrel shift. So let's dive straight into the intuition behind that. So why would the domestic supply curve shift in this case? Well, we have to compare it between free trade and quota to be able to understand this. So under the free trade scenario, because there is an infinite amount of goods and services flowing into the country, actually the world price is a more dominant force because it's a much larger quantity compared with the domestic supply. So that is a more dominant force, dominant player in the market. So the world price will just determine the price. However, in this case, the quota is actually quite limited. It's only 4.5 million barrels, and in many of the real life cases, it will actually be smaller, even smaller in comparison to the domestic supply. As in this case, it's relatively insignificant compared with the influx of world supply under the free trade scenario. So what we do is that we actually shift the domestic supply curve because these two are actually quite comparable to each other. So no single force will be the more dominant player, meaning that both the quantity supplied by the domestic suppliers and the foreign supplies will be taken into consideration when we are determining the new supply curve. So what we do is that we just shift the supply curve to the right hand side. We add in to the actual quantity to the existing supply curve within the market. So it gives us S star, this new curve. Because of comparison purposes, we wanted to compare the result of tariff and quota. We put the import quantity to be 4.5, which will match closely with tariff. But the result of tariff and quota aren't usually the same in most cases. It really depends on how many units of quota the government set and how much the government want to charge in terms of tariff. So these 2 points don't always coincide in most cases. But here, just for analytical purposes, I put it at exactly the same point. So let's analyze the result of this quota and tariff. So actually under $40 per barrel tariff or a 4.5 million barrels of oil per day of quota, the result is pretty much the same, except a box of D. The distribution of the income D is actually different in these two cases. In the tariff case, this D is actually the tax revenue earned by the government. Because remember, like I talked in the last video, this section, 4.5 billion barrels, is the imports under a tariff. It's also the imports under the quota. So that's the quantity of units supplied by the foreign suppliers, while $40 is a tax. So the box D will be the government revenue. But under the quota scenario, that part will actually be gained by the foreign producers. Why? Because the foreign producers is again producing 4.5 million barrels, but the price is higher. It's at $100 per barrel. So in this case, this whole rectangle, so I probably should erase this. Erase the whole thing. That's not good, but anyways, so this whole yellow shaded area will actually be the revenue gained by the foreign producer. So that is a total revenue gained by the foreign producer. So the area D is again not gained by the government, but gained by the foreign producers if the government actually impose a quota. So from a government standpoint, they will rather put tariff than quota because they themselves can get the tax revenue. So that's basically analysis behind the quota diagram, and I would like you guys to enjoy it and see you next time.